All right, so hey, this is really cool. I want to tell you about this. Okay, so I got this email today, and my emails can be interesting at times, but this was an incredible email. It says, "Hello, my name is Tammy. I currently live in Panama City Beach, but she was born and raised in Kentucky. She noticed some Kentucky people around here. Figured out there was some people from the church that she's originally from, which is the church that some of us are from." And she said, all of her experiences down here around you all have been with polite young ladies and gentlemen. You guys. No excessive noise, no rowdy elevator experiences. It's been great. That's what she says. And she says that is pretty impressive considering she counted 12 buses on the lot. Listen. She said, "My daughter, who's a property manager here, came over yesterday and shared that some teen boys asked her before they got on the elevator if she'd be comfortable with a group of 8 getting on the elevator with her. That made an impact. Please tell your youth workers and kids that how they act and the things they do make an impact on the world around them. In this case, it was a good impact." So Tammy from Panama City is paying attention to you guys, so good job, all right? Keep up the good work. So how many of you all can remember or name, just by show of hands, all of your elementary school teachers that you had? You remember all of them by name. That's impressive. I said show of hands. I didn't say talk. Your generation and the rhetorical questions. You'll figure it out one day. All right. I have all these friends. I have all these friends who are older than me, so I think I'm the odd one here because apparently all of you can do it. I have all these friends who are older than me that can literally name every teacher they had from kindergarten all the way through 12th grade. I can probably maybe manage to name 3, 4, maybe 5 teachers that I had, including the teachers that I had in high school. And so I remember my teachers more based around the things they did than I remember even their names. And unfortunately, I remember mostly the bad ones. But I had this one really unique experience with a teacher when I was in 3rd grade. I lived in Grand Prairie, Texas, which was just right outside of Dallas. And she was my 3rd grade teacher. I had been in one school when I was in kindergarten, 1st grade, another school when I was in 2nd grade, and then a different school when I was in 3rd grade. And I was kind of new to the area and that kind of thing. And she was really cool in one sense because she picked up on the fact that I really loved to read. And so she kept giving me these books to read. And because of where I lived in a pretty rough neighborhood. My mom wouldn't let me go outside at night and ride my bike around the neighborhood or anything like that. I had to stay in the house. And it was also 8,000 degrees in the shade most of the time. And so I stayed in the house. And while my grandparents, who we lived with at the time, watched Wheel of Fortune and Jeopardy and the nightly news, I was reading books. And so she kept giving me book after book after book after book, which is really, really cool. The other thing, though, that she would do, and I got in trouble a lot, was when I got in trouble, especially if we were in the hallway, is she would grab me by the ear and twist and then pull me to wherever she wanted me to go. Now, your generation looks at that and goes, that's criminal. My generation goes, that's normal, okay? So that's the way things were for a long time. So I didn't think anything of it, just thought this is the way that she disciplines and things like that. Now, I actually gained a tremendous amount of respect for this teacher because of the way she treated me at the season of life that I was in. She held me accountable for things, and at the same time, she showed me a whole bunch of grace. But the one thing that I really did not appreciate that she did was the very first report card that I got from her. Back in the day, we used to actually have a card, okay, a physical card that you would get in the mail, and it would have actual grades on it, like A, B, C, D, and F. It had actual grades even when you were in elementary school. It wasn't needs improvement or smiley faces or frowny faces or anything like that. It was a real report card, and it had this little comment section at the bottom where a teacher could write some things, and I'll never forget what she wrote. She wrote, "Scott is a great leader." And if she would have just stopped there, that would have been excellent. But she didn't. She said, "The problem is he's leading everyone in the class in the wrong direction." Ouch, right? Now, hang with me here. I did a couple different trips to Northern Ireland. When you go to Northern Ireland, it's interesting. If you've ever been to Central Kentucky, it actually looks a lot like Central Kentucky. There's rolling green hills. There's these beautiful stone fences. The only real distinction, except for the ocean, because it's like an island, is that inside of those stone fences are not, million-dollar racehorses. There are millions upon millions, it at least feels this way, of sheep Now, let me tell you about sheep. Sheep are not the smartest animals in the world. Has anybody ever, by show of hands, been around sheep? Growing up in central Kentucky, there's a field trip that we all have to do like at least 3 times called going to Shakertown, and we watch people shear sheep. It's not exciting at all, but we all have to go through it. It's like a rite of passage there. Well, sheep are not very bright animals, and they can't take care of themselves at all. They'll actually just wander right off of cliffs. Their wool is so absorbent that when they walk out into a stream or into a lake or something like that, they'll just keep on going, and slowly they'll be filling up with water until they drown themselves. Like they're not very smart that way. Their wool never stops growing, and so if no one shears their wool, they'll turn into these like woolly mammoth-looking creatures, and they can get so top-heavy that when they fall, if they fall, and they end up on their back, they actually can't get up. So they'll just lay there with their legs in the air, and predators will come feast on them and eat them alive, okay? They get very agitated. Some of you girls are just looking at me like, I didn't do it to the sheep, okay? I'm reporting the news. I didn't kill the sheep, okay? So sheep do get killed though, a lot. And so sheep, they will get absolutely just driven crazy and insane by these different flies and gnats that will go into their nostrils and lay eggs, and then they'll hatch and things like that. And so then they'll actually bang their heads against rocks and against the ground. I'm not making this stuff up because it's driving them crazy, and sometimes they will run off of cliffs because the flies and gnats are driving them crazy. Now, here's the thing I want to throw out there to you. In the Bible, there's an animal that you and I are compared to more than any other animal by like a lot. Anyone want to guess which animal that is? Sheep. Now, here's the question. Does God do that, and does His Word do that because God wants us to feel dumb and stupid? No, I don't think so. I don't think that's actually it at all. Does He want us to feel necessarily like inadequate or small? No. I don't think that's really what He's after. I think what God's after is one simple thing, because here's the truth that I really want resonating in your heart and in your mind tonight more than anything else, is simply this. Sheep need a shepherd. Sheep need a shepherd. And so do you. And so do I. We all need a shepherd. Now, let me tell you a little bit about shepherds, especially in the ancient world and in Israel. Sheep are different than a lot of animals, and so shepherds in the ancient world would lead sheep, and I've seen this happen. They don't drive sheep. So you can sign up to go on like a cattle drive out west, and you get behind those cows and you make them go. I don't know. I've never been on a cattle drive. I don't know how that works, but you drive them, okay? You don't drive sheep, you lead sheep. And so shepherds, especially in the ancient world, and in huge parts of our world today that are third world, spend an inordinate and enormous amount of time with their sheep. They will lead them, and the sheep will follow. Now, when I've been to Northern Ireland, it's interesting. You will see one big pasture field with like a bazillion sheep, but they'll all have these different like colors painted on their backs. And the colors and the patterns on their backs are supposed to indicate who they belong to. And so it begs the question, like when it's time to sort these sheep out, one goes with Thomas and one goes with Luke and one goes with John, like how are they going to get those sheep sorted out and get them to Thomas and Luke and John and all that kind of thing? And here's what's interesting. A lot of shepherds will have a unique song that they will actually sing, and they can go out to that flock, and when they sing it, that shepherd's sheep will actually come out of that bigger flock and follow the voice of their shepherd. It's super interesting. Now, in the ancient world, shepherds would actually spend the night out in the pasture fields and things like that with their sheep, and sometimes they would need to lead them back into the sheep pen, which oftentimes was just like a cave or something like that. And so they would get to the mouth of the cave, and there would be like an entrance to it. And so they would like usher the sheep in, and they would check on each sheep as they came in, and they would look at them, and they would mend their wounds, and they would pour oil on their wounds. I mean, this is after a long day of having already led them to green pastures, and already led them to water, and already like fighting off wolves and other predators and things like that. At the end of this long, laborious day, the shepherd would lead the sheep would come in, he would sit down and he would mend their wounds, he would bind them up, and then he would get them successfully into the pen or into the cave or whatever that was. And if there wasn't like a gate, if there wasn't like a door, he would actually lay down in the entrance and become the gate and become the door, which was like a way of saying like, hey, predators, you got to go through me if you want to get to them. It's really, really interesting. Shepherds had this special relationship with the sheep. Now, God, for a long time, if you kind of track this through the Old Testament, had a shepherd and sheep kind of relationship with a specific group of people. And it was known as the Hebrew people or the Israelite people, later the Jewish people. And so you can kind of trace with them. You can pick up the story in different places. You can pick up their story in slavery in Egypt. And he leads them out of bondage and slavery in Egypt, and he leads them through the desert. And while they're in the desert, he provides for them, makes sure they have food, makes sure they have water, makes sure they have protection. And he actually leads them to a place called the Promised Land. There was a place that was known as being flowing with milk and honey, this abundant place. Now, God along the way would recruit partners that would come underneath of his authority that would be shepherds for his people as well, that were under his authority, people like Moses. So if you think in context of like Moses being the leader that was partnering with God and entrusted with the responsibility of shepherding his people during that time. Now, interestingly enough, as time went by and they got into the Promised Land and things like that, the shepherds, the people who were supposed to lead God's people, started to turn their hearts in a different direction. And here's the thing about being a leader. Just because you're a leader doesn't mean you're a good one. Like me in third grade. And so the leaders over the people started to lead God's people and shepherd God's people in the wrong direction. And actually made God really, really mad. Made him really, really furious, because after all, these are his people, his sheep of his flock. And so in Ezekiel chapter 34, you have this really interesting kind of word of condemnation coming down from God to the shepherds. Listen to this. Woe to the shepherds of Israel who only take care of themselves. You've not strengthened the weak or healed the sick or bound up the injured. You've not brought back the strays or searched for the lost. You've ruled them harshly and brutally. They weren't leading the sheep, they were driving the sheep. They weren't shepherding the sheep. They were being bad shepherds. And God didn't take this lightly. Listen to this. God says, I'm against the shepherds and will hold them accountable for my flock. I will remove them from the tending of the flock so that the shepherds can no longer feed themselves. I'll rescue my flock from their mouths, and it will no longer be food for them. I myself will search for my sheep and look after them as a shepherd looks after his scattered flock when he's with them. So I will look after my sheep. I will rescue them from all the places where they were scattered on the day of the clouds and the darkness. Basically, God says to the bad shepherds, you're fired, I'll do it myself. You've done a terrible job. So this dude named John, one of Jesus' best friends in the New Testament, he really wants us to get this concept down. Like, he really wants us to understand this. And so in order for us to get to it, I want to tell you about what happens in John chapter 9, which leads us to John chapter 10, where we're going to get later here in a few minutes. But in John chapter 9, Jesus and his disciples, they're walking through town, and they come across this man who was born blind. And everybody in town knows him because he's begging for his life. Like, he relies on other people's good graces to stay alive, and everybody in town knows, yeah, he's been blind since the day he was born. And so these disciples look at Jesus, and they've got these theological questions they want to ask Jesus about, like, what caused that, whose fault is it, all that kind of thing. And Jesus is not super interested in answering those questions. He's like way more interested in helping this man. And so he calls this man to him, and then he does something super interesting. Like, Jesus, when he does miracles, he doesn't always do them the same way. And so when he does something, this is important to understand, if Jesus does something, he does it intentionally, okay? So Jesus, when he brings this man before him, he spits on the ground, and he must have spit a lot because he made some mud out of that spit, and then he puts it in the man's eyes, and he tells the man, go wash your eyes, and then you'll be healed. And so the man does. He goes and he washes his eyes. He can see. Now, people start spotting this dude around town, the one who was formerly blind but can now see, and they notice something's different about him. Like, I think George can see. Like, George is like, he doesn't seem to, his name probably was not George, but he's walking and jumping and running and he doesn't need any help and all this stuff's going on. And so word gets around to the religious leaders, the ones that are supposed to be the shepherds, by the way, that's supposed to take care of God's people, gets around that, hey, the dude that was born blind's not blind anymore. And so they call him in and they're like, hey, how did that happen? And he's like, well, this dude, he told me, he spit on the ground, he put the mud in my eyes, and then he told me to go wash, and now I can see. And the second that they heard that he had made mud, they got furious. Now here's why. Because the day that Jesus had done this was the Sabbath. Now, the Sabbath was super interesting because the Sabbath was this really good gift that God had given to his people. Basically, God's going to his people, hey, work real hard for 6 days and then don't do anything on the seventh day. Like rest, like celebrate, like enjoy the fruits of your labor. Let everything rest. Let everybody rest. Everybody enjoy the fact that I'm God and I got this under control and you can sit down and you can take a break and you can sleep and you can eat and you can take a break and then you can go back to work tomorrow. That's a really good gift. But the people, the shepherds in particular, had taken this really good gift and they had twisted it inside out and upside down. And they had added rule after rule after rule and layer after layer after layer to this and many other laws in such a way that it became utterly unrecognizable. And so in fear of ever doing anything that would violate the Sabbath, they wanted to make sure they were really precise about what defined work. And so one of the rules that they had come up with was, hey, listen, no making mud on the Sabbath. All you mud-making people out there who just love to make mud all the time, like this is something people do. So the reason was because if you made mud on the Sabbath and someone stepped in it, they would then have to clean it off their shoe later. That'd be work. You'd be violating the Sabbath. So when they find out that Jesus intentionally made mud on the Sabbath, they lose sight of the fact that the man who couldn't see now can see, and now all they can see is the fact that Jesus has violated the Sabbath, and we've got to do something about this. And so they keep on grilling the man. They keep on grilling him about this, and finally he gets like super sarcastic with the leaders. Is like, why do you keep asking me about Jesus? Do you want to become his followers too? And that makes them flip out, and they throw him out of the synagogue. They throw him out. And so Jesus finds out that they've thrown the man out of the synagogue, and he comes across him again. And it goes like this in John chapter 9, verse 35. When Jesus heard what had happened, he found the man and asked, do you believe in the Son of Man? And the man answered, well, who is he, sir? I want to believe in him. Well, you have seen him, Jesus said, and he's speaking to you. Yes, Lord, I believe, the man said, and he worshiped Jesus. Then Jesus told him, I entered the world to render judgment, to give sight to the blind, and to show those who think they see that they are blind. Some Pharisees, the shepherds, who were standing nearby, heard him and asked, are you saying we're blind? And Jesus says, if you were blind, you wouldn't be guilty. But you remain guilty because you claim you can see. And these shepherds, they're deeply offended by Jesus. They don't like being told that they're blind and that they don't understand when they're the ones who think that they see clearly and they understand everything better than everybody else. And it's right in the very next moment, they get so mad at Jesus that Jesus says these words from John chapter 10 that Lane read earlier. Look at it again, John chapter 10. Very truly, I tell you, Pharisees, anyone who does not enter the sheep pen by the gate, but climbs in by another way is a thief and a robber. The one who enters by the gate is the shepherd of the sheep. The gatekeeper opens the gate for him, and the sheep listen to his voice. He calls his own sheep by name, and he leads them out. And when he's brought out all his own, he goes on ahead of them, and his sheep follow him because they know his voice. But they will never follow a stranger. In fact, they will run away from him because they do not recognize a stranger's voice. Jesus used this figure of speech, but the Pharisees did not understand what he was telling them. They see sheep all around them all the time, every day. They see this happen all the time, and yet they still don't understand Jesus. Therefore, Jesus said again, very truly, I tell you, I'm the gate for the sheep. All who've come before me are thieves and robbers, but the sheep have not listened to them. I'm the gate. Whoever enters through me will be saved. They will come in and go out and find pasture, and the thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I have come that they may have life and have it to the full. I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. The hired hand is not the shepherd. It does not own the sheep. So when he sees the wolf coming, he abandons the sheep and runs away. Then the wolf attacks in the flock, and it scatters, and the man runs away because he's a hired hand and cares nothing for the sheep. I am the good shepherd. I know my sheep, and my sheep know me, just as the Father knows me, and I know the Father, and I lay down my life for the sheep. Let me tell you who will not lay down their life for you. Those Instagram influencers that you follow. Those YouTube celebrities that care absolutely nothing about you. See, Jesus frames this up for us in some categories that would have been super easy for them to understand. You are the sheep. I am the sheep. We are the sheep, which means we need a shepherd. Because all sheep need a shepherd, because sheep left to their own devices are utterly destructive to their own well-being and good. The problem is there are what Jesus calls these hired hands. People have been hired to take care of someone else's sheep, and when the thieves come and the predators creep in, the hired hand runs away because the hired hand doesn't care about the sheep. They're not his sheep. So here's what I want you to think about. Who is it in your life that if your world fell apart tonight would be your first phone call? 2:00 in the morning, something terrible happens. Who is it that you know beyond a shadow of a doubt would be there for you? When your parents tell you they're splitting up, who would you lean on? When your friend commits suicide, who would you reach out to? When you get cut from the team, when you mess up really bad, when you sin so much and you're so ashamed of what you've done, who is it that you would go toward, not away from? And who is it that wants good for you? Who's coming to mind right now? Who are those, here's what I'll call them, little g, good shepherds. Who are the good shepherds with a little g, little s, in your life? They may be right here, right now. They may be your pastors, your small group leaders, your parents. There may be some friends that are sitting right next to you. Those are little g, little s, good shepherds in your life. And here's how you can tell someone is a good shepherd in your life: if they lead you to the ultimate big G, good shepherd. If they're going, man, Jesus. If they're pointing you to Jesus, then they are a good shepherd in your life. I was on a trip just like the one that you're on right now many, many, many years ago, and man, I messed up. Like big time, like sinned big and got caught. And in that moment, there was a pastor who showed me two things that I desperately needed in that moment: grace and truth. That's what I have tattooed on my wrists, by the way. He didn't show me all truth and condemn me and shame me. He didn't show me only grace and tell me it's no big deal. No, he did what Jesus did and represented both grace and truth. And I really shudder to think about what my actual life would have ended up looking like had I had another kind of shepherd who wasn't good with me in that moment. If I would have had a shepherd who would have just condemned me and shamed me, my whole life might look different. If I had a shepherd who just kind of winked and smiled and nudged and said, it's no big deal, my life might look totally, totally different. You need to look for good shepherds who will point you to the good shepherd. And I want to challenge some of you to stop following bad shepherds. Stop following bad shepherds. Quit handing your heart to people who don't even like you, much less love you. Don't hand your heart over to them. Don't be led around by people who don't lead you to Jesus. They will take you to places you don't want to go. They will lead you to do things you don't want to do. And when it all hits the fan and your world starts falling apart, guess who won't be around? Them. They won't be there to help you, because bad shepherds don't fight for the sheep. They don't. And here's the reality. You have an enemy. John 10:10, the thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy you. The reason you feel some days like all hell is set against you, listen to me, is because it is. It is. You have an enemy who wants to see your death and your destruction and your ruin. And there are actually people who will partner with the enemy in that process. And some of us are willingly handing over our hearts to the enemy, to the bad shepherds. And I just want to challenge you. Don't hand your heart to bad shepherds anymore. Because John 10:10 doesn't just stop with the description of a thief. Jesus says, "But I have come that you would have life and have it to the full." And he ain't lying. God made a promise all those years ago in Ezekiel when he fired those shepherds that he'd do it himself. And he did do it himself when he sent his son Jesus to be the ultimate good shepherd. Many of you have heard me say this before, that I really do believe that our entire lives are lived out of what we believe to be true about God's intentions towards us. In other words, if you think that God's desire is to steal from you, take from you, ruin your fun, be this big cosmic killjoy who's always out to get you and always making sure you don't run too fast in church or whatever that may be, your whole life will be lived in hiding from someone who actually has great intentions towards you, who literally just explicitly said, "I've come that you would have life and have it to the full. And by the way, I made the thing called life, so I know how life works best. So if you'll trust me, if you'll follow where I lead you, you'll actually find everything that your heart is longing for." He really is a good shepherd. You know, it's interesting. One of the most famous passages in the Bible was written by this dude honestly, if you just sit back from a 40,000-foot perspective and examine his life, he was a consistent murderer, a consistent adulterer. He backstabbed his best friends repeatedly. He betrayed his own children, had his own children betray him. Just a train wreck of a life in some senses, but in another sense, this King David guy is called a man after God's own heart. And he was a shepherd boy for a long, long time. Spent a lot of time out in fields with sheep under the stars, and he wrote a lot of songs. Most famous one being this: "The Lord is my shepherd, I lack nothing. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. He refreshes my soul. He guides me along the right paths for his name's sake. Even though I walk through the darkest valley, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows. Surely your goodness and love will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever." And I guess here's my question. Can you say those words? The Lord is my shepherd. Is he really? Can you say, yes, Jesus is actually my good shepherd? You have a shepherd, whether you like it or not. You're following someone. You may think you're just, autonomous and leading your own life and you don't follow anybody. Guess what? Yeah, you do. You're following somebody. And the only question is, are you following the good shepherd? Or are you following some hired hand? You're following a bad shepherd. See, Jesus, the good shepherd, made an explicit statement. He said, "I lay down my life for the sheep." He didn't say, "I lay down my life for the good sheep." He didn't say, "I lay down my life for the sheep that don't cuss." He didn't say, "I lay down my life for the sheep who come to church." He didn't say, "I lay down my life for the sheep who know all the words to the worship songs." He said, "I lay down my life for the sheep." All of us broken, messed up, ashamed, and sinful, lost sheep. He came for us and he laid down his life for us. I've preached at CIY way more times than I can count over the last, 15, 20 years. But I'll tell you this, I've rarely preached a sermon at CIY where I haven't landed right here with these verses, Romans chapter 5, verse 6 through 8. You see, at just the right time, when we were still powerless, Christ died for the ungodly. Very rarely will anyone die for a righteous person, though for a good person, someone might possibly dare to die. Here's my two favorite words in the Bible, but God. But God demonstrates his own love for us in this: while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. Which means this: when I replay the tapes of my life and I remember my worst moments of deepest shame, the things that I regret, the ways that I have messed up, the things that haunt me still to this day, that when the enemy gets in my ear and accuses me and says, that's who you still are, when I think of those deepest, darkest moments of shame and regret, those are the very moments that Jesus had in mind when he went to the cross for me and you. It was your worst moment that Jesus looked at his Father and said, I'll pay for that, I'll become that, I'll fix that, I'll heal that, I'll forgive that. While we were still sinners, Jesus chose to lay down his life for us. And you've got the same tapes in your young minds, in your young hearts. And here's the thing. When the shepherd calls his sheep, checks them out, and they go into that sheep pen, they go through that door and through that gate, whatever that is. I imagine there's some sheep that are going to come happy and healthy and bounding in, and they're going to look fine, and they're just going to run right in. That's great. Then there's going to be some that kind of come limping, and he'll mend their wounds, bind them up, say, come on in. Then some time's going to go by, and then there's going to be some real stragglers. Man, the ones that just barely made it, right? Like the ones that like the enemy just tore into. Bloody, beaten up, broken down, crawling in. And you know what he's not going to do in that moment? He's not going to go, you stupid sheep, told you not to wander. He's going to get down there on his hands and knees, and he's going to mend that broken sheep, and that healed sheep will be welcomed home. And he'll sit, he'll call. There'll be some sheep. There'll be some sheep that are lost, and you know what he'll do? He'll go find them. Not my words, his. Go read Luke 15. He'll come find his lost, his broken, his sinful, his messed up sheep because he loves you that much. And then when he carries you home and he welcomes you in, he will lay down at the entrance and say to the enemy, you're coming through me. Now let me just land with this question. Who doesn't want that? Who doesn't want that kind of home with that kind of shepherd who would literally lay down their life for you? I want it. I want it, and I'm confident that we have far better things ahead of us than all the things that we leave behind. Not my words, C.S. Lewis's. So here's the thing. You have an opportunity tonight to make a decision to say, you know what? Jesus, I want to respond to your voice now, not later. I want to come on home. I want to step through the door because Jesus said, I'm the way, I'm the truth, I'm the life, and no one comes to the Father except through me. And he meant it, and he demonstrated it by going to a cross for me and for you so that we never had to doubt his commitment to us to be for us. So my prayer for you tonight is that you make a firm decision to follow the voice of the Good Shepherd. So let me pray for us. Father, I'm so thankful for the sound of your voice in our life as we read it in the pages of the Word of God. As we read these words of Jesus, Father, they resonate deep in my heart and my soul every time I read them. And Father, even though we deserve such punishment and condemnation, you give us grace and you give us mercy and you give us truth so that we can follow you. Father, thank you for fighting for us to the degree that you sent your one and only Son for us. We can never pay you back for that, but we can worship you with everything that we have. And when we sin and when we mess up, we won't run away from you. We'll run towards you because we know that we can approach your throne of grace with confidence to receive mercy and find grace in our time of need. Thank you for your healing work in our lives. And my prayer tonight, Father, is that many of these students will respond to your voice. In Jesus' name, amen.